So this is the basics of this unit when we're talking about squares, square roots, cubes, and cube roots. So if we have any basic problem like this, if it has a squared, the inverse operation is to square root it. So we're going to square root it. And whenever we add the square root to the problem, that means we need all the possible answers. So this means that this x could be a positive 5 or it could be a negative 5, because 5 times 5 is positive 25 and negative 5 times negative 5 is also positive 25. So whenever we add the square root to the problem, we need both. So when we do the square x squared equals negative 25 and I square root both problems, I now have a negative inside of a square root, and that can't happen. So this is no solution. So now we're going to do the opposite operation, and it's already square rooted, and now we need to square it to cancel each other out. So I'm going to cancel this. This gets eliminated, so just x equals, and then 5 squared is 25, and it's just positive 25. Because if I plugged in negative 25 into this, there would be a negative inside the square root, which can't happen. Same thing over here. I have a square root. The inverse operation is to square it. But as soon as I see that there's a square root that equals a negative, I should know that there's no solution. If I didn't, and I continued to do this problem, I would get the square root, or I would get x equals 25. When I plug that back in, the square root of 25 does not equal negative 5. Remember, we're only looking for the principal root when we have a square root starting in the problem, and that's always positive. So that can't happen. So even if you don't notice it here, that's why we always check our answer. Down here, when we have this negative or anything outside of the radical, we need to get rid of that first. So if this is negative the square root of x equals 4, then we need to divide by a negative 1 or multiply by a negative 1 or just flip all the answers so we get the square root of x equals negative 4 now, which means that it's no solution. It's the same issue as the one we just did. If it starts off negative and I divide by a negative 1 or multiply by a negative 1 or just flip all the signs, then I get x equals 4, and now I can solve it by squaring both sides. And when I square both sides, I get 16. So just one answer for that one. Now I'm going to do the cube roots. So the cube roots, if I start with a cube root, then I need to cube both sides to get rid of this. So I cube root that, I cube that, and I cube this. So x equals 5 times 5 times 5, which is 125. Same thing over here, but when it's an odd number as the index here, I can have a negative, because a negative times a negative times a negative does make a negative. If I have 3 negatives, these two pair up to make a positive, and then this guy's left over to keep it as a negative answer. So when I cube this side, it's okay that it's a negative on that side, because I'm going to get x equals negative 125. Because negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 25, then times that by a negative 5, and I get a negative 125. So odd or indexes of 3 are okay to be negative. Then when I'm doing this one, I need to do the square root of it, or the cube root of it, because that's the inverse operation, so those will cancel out. I get x. I do the cube root of this, and I get just 5. Not the positive and negative 5 like I did up here, because I'm only getting one answer. And you can see why, because when I do negative 125, I am going to get just negative 5. Right, so those are the basics for this section.